It's as far back as it's going to go, I guess. Hey, hi, hello, welcome. Let's turn that music down a little bit here. Yeah, great to have the intro music, but you know what? It's nice to just have uninterrupted talk. So I haven't had the opportunity to live stream in quite some time, and I apologize for that. I do enjoy it, I do like it, and I like the interaction, but like anything else, life and work gets in the way. However, going to do this one, see how it goes, and try to include a Q&A roundup of previous questions and then any questions that come in on the chat. So before we get started, let's just quickly talk about the chat rules. Now, participation is nice. In fact, if you introduce yourself, it also helps a lot better. I do apologize if I mispronounce names. I'll apologize in advance. But yeah, introduce yourself, where you're from, what you do, etc. Throw it in the chat. Ask and answer questions. And you know what? If there's a question that comes up and you know the answer to it right away, by all means, you can go ahead and jump in. Pooling our knowledge is great. Let's not pool our ignorance, but let's pool our knowledge. And please, above all and beyond all, realize one thing is that it's all about gathering knowledge, and you may have gathered a lot more than somebody else that asks something in the chat. So be nice, be civil. Yeah, and let's understand too that this is all discussion. It's not considered professional advice. As far as I'm concerned, professional advice occurs when you sign a contract and talk about how much money is going to change hands. So, great. Now, just getting on with it, understanding that I just want to touch on hazard assessments first, because I've had a lot of interesting questions regarding hazard assessments this week, and from a lot of different angles. From the idea of an informal hazard assessment, which is sometimes called like a safety scan or a pre-work scan or a task scan. Lots of people have called it lots of different things, all the way up to the formal hazard assessment or the site-specific ones and how everything works together. And so maybe just a quick little talk on that, and then we can launch into the Q&A stuff. So by all means. Now, realize one thing. I appreciate all comments, and I appreciate things in the chat and everything. And the comments are also where I get the questions. So if you feel like it, leave a comment. I appreciate it. New comment thingy down there. I don't know. Let me know what you think about it. But this intercommunication and forming a community is all it's all about, and it's all what I wanted to do. So understanding with hazard assessments, and a lot of people will think that they do that formal job hazard assessment or the job task analysis or the work task analysis, lots of different names. But the idea is that each job is analyzed and broken down into duties and tasks, and then the hazards that are present with those tasks are then assessed and analyzed. And those hazards are considered for their risk and probable consequence, and then controls are put in place to reduce risk. And all of this is documented. The whole entire process is documented and kept as a record. And it's an ongoing record with continuous improvement. It's not a one and done, which a lot of people will make the mistake and think, okay, I'm done. I don't have to worry about it anymore. It's done. But that's not the case. It's an ever-evolving process. And I don't know, it looks like my camera froze. Just hang on a sec here. Let's just, that camera's working, but that camera froze. So just give me a minute to fix it, and we can get going again. But back as far as the hazard assessments go, part of what goes into the improvement with that formal job hazard assessment is the notion of how does it continuously improve? And the two things that help improve it are, number one, the site-specific hazard assessments, and number two, this notion of informal hazard assessments, or the pre-work scans or the task scans. So I'll explain the last one first and see how it matches towards it. And then I'll talk about the site-specific, and then I'll talk a little bit more about bidding and project management and how that goes into the hazard assessment. And then we'll get into the Q&A, I promise. So the idea of the informal or task scan, the informal hazard assessment or task scan, is your job hazard assessment has already been done. So let's say that, and hey, we'll put it into a few different categories. Let's say that you're a warehouse person and all of your assessments have been done and looking around manual materials handling, moving forklifts and mechanical assisted leverage and moving. But all of a sudden you walk into an area, you look and you notice that some of the packaging has broken in a shipment and there's liquid all over the floor. And so realistically, maybe your hazard assessment has talked about exposure to hazardous chemicals, what to do, the SDS and all of that. But the idea is you have to now look at that and then consider the controls that you're going to put in place to make sure that your work can continue safely. Whether it be cordoning off the area, getting spill kits, donning different PPE, and then dealing with the spill, or backing out and calling specialized people. You may have spill containment personnel that look after it, or an outside contractor that'll come in and deal with it. I don't know. But that's that part of that informal hazard assessment. Now, the other thing is was the job hazard assessment accurate enough to have addressed that? Or do you have to take that incident, because hopefully you've also called it an incident, and consider adding some of that process to the formal job hazard assessment? That's that idea of continuous improvement. And another case might be, say, a healthcare worker. And yes, as a healthcare worker, you've dealt with all sorts of things like a point of care risk assessment and so forth. And all of this is listed in your job hazard assessment. But all of a sudden, you have gone into a room and found that there has been an electrical malfunction with part of the equipment, and now you have to deal with it and care with the worker. And so what do you do? So you have to scan the area, look, and understand what controls do you have at your disposal that you can either control those hazards, work can continue safely, and deal with the patient. Or do you have to call specialized personnel and pause work? And do you have to do things like report to others, communicate the hazards? And is this something that has to be added to your formal hazard assessment, or is it a one-off incident that needs to be recorded and considered? And maybe some electrical work has to take place to prevent it further instances. So that's how those two work together. Now, the other one is like the field level hazard assessment, the site specific or hazard assessment, or the field level risk assessments. It's also called FLRA. Excuse me. So now the thing is, this is done for out of scope work. It may be for where you're going off site, or it's maybe, say, something like your HVAC technician, heating, ventilation, air conditioning technician, and you have to enter a mechanical room only once a year. And because that's something that's done infrequently, there's a need to create a field level or a site-specific hazard assessment because it's a one-off. Now, both of these instances, itchy nose, both of these instances are one-offs. They're unusual. So you would do that same thing. You would consider all of the controls that are in your formal hazard assessment, and then you would apply them in these site-specific or one-off out-of-scope situations. Now, the other things to consider is, how does that continuous improvement evolve into it? Let's say that now, at first off, you maintain something off-site. You maintain part of some equipment off-site in a remote location, but it's happening one-off, not very much. But all of a sudden, it starts to happen in a more frequent basis. And so rather than be just a field level hazard assessment, do you have to consider that hazard assessment process and add it to your formal hazard assessment because it's happening more frequently? So if one-offs or out-of-scope things start to occur more on a frequent basis, then you have to make that consideration of adding it to your formal hazard assessment, because it's now should be considered part of your regular tasks and duties that you perform. So both of those, the informal hazard assessment and the site-specific or field-level hazard assessment, both can morph in or complement to your formal hazard assessment process. You have to realize that health and safety is an ongoing process. It's continuous improvement. It's not one and done. You can never just put a book on a shelf and say, okay, task done, on to something else. It doesn't work that way. Not at all. Okay, so it's a matter, oh, look, that camera froze. My goodness, this is terrible. Cameras are freezing all over the place. Well, we won't worry about that one. We won't switch to it. But when we're considering these notions of hazard assessments, the other process is, what about when you're deploying workers to an area? Say you're a security company and you're deploying workers to different sites to look into something. Now, ideally, what has to happen is, say you get a new contract. Whoever's bidding on that contract should be walking that site first, and then considering all of the probable hazards that their patrol staff or their security officers, security guards, whatever you call them, may encounter. That should be part of the consideration for the bidding process, but it should also be part of, how should we say, the site-specific hazard assessment when the employee or worker arrives on site. So if you're thinking about it, part of that site-specific hazard assessment is already done by the person doing the bidding or the project management. The same goes for, say, your landscaping company and you're going to do a new contract at a new site. That same process should be going into place by the project manager or the person who's doing the bidding on the contract, should be considering a lot of those hazards in place, and they should be added to that site hazard assessment so that it would complement the worker's job hazard assessment. And then when the worker comes on site, they will use that informal or task hazard assessment process when they walk onto site, and they may go, oh, that wasn't noted. I'll have to write it down. That wasn't noted. I'll write it down. And then it's a reporting back, and then things are changed and amended and edited so that that hazard assessment is fully functional. Remember, it's not a one and done. And so if you have even a temporary work site, say you're going to be working there for 2 weeks, you may have that site hazard assessment has been done by the project manager, whoever bidded on the contract. But then that hazard assessment may change for a few reasons. Number one, external influences, like all of a sudden the city decides that they're going to do some work adjacent to it. Well, that's going to affect the hazard assessment. The weather can affect the hazard assessment, and the project progress can affect the hazard assessment. So it's always a changing process. So don't just think that it's a one and done and you can complete it. Does that make sense? Does it make sense? Does it sound like it would be a fully functional process? Let me know in the comments. I appreciate the comments. Let me know what you think. I want to know what you think. Okay, it's not about what I think, it's about what you think. I think I did a good job. Now, just give me a second. I want to try and fix the other camera. There, it works again. Everything works. The world is happy, so hopefully it'll continue to work. Sorry about that. Now, something else to consider is, along with all of the hazard assessments, how they work with the rest of your health and safety processes. So I want to talk about the first question that's come in, and Cephaldine Morel, and honestly, sorry, buddy, if I'm mispronouncing that, but part of that is the control of work and permit to work systems. And so he asked, can you explain exactly what is control of work and permit to work systems? Now, the idea behind controlling work is so that you can also control hazards. And a lot of organizations will call it a work permit program. They'll call it maybe they'll isolate it by the different work permits. I'll talk about that in a sec. Or they will call it the control of work process, control of work program, where they're controlling work in different parts of either their asset, their building, or the construction project. And there's a lot of good reason for that to take place. One of those reasons, of course, might be just to make sure that there's not antagonistic work taking place. Let's picture that you're doing hot work, welding, grinding, cutting, things like that, where you're going to cause heat and sparks. And at the same time, the project manager has scheduled the installation of flammables or combustible material right next to it. Well, that's not going to work. And so, of course, the project has been planned, but a lot of times, well, the contractor from out of town arrived, they just want to do the work now. And so that's why that work permitting or control of work process takes place. Now, the other reason is and it looks at the emergency management and risk management process. Let's say that you're got a project and there's going to be several different high-risk things and activities going on. There's going to be hot work, welding, grinding, abrasive cutting, etc. And there's going to be confined space entry for whatever reason. There's going to be working at heights, and there could be chemical management. So a lot of these will require a work permitting process so that the control of work can take place. But also, too, is so the emergency management can be on hand. Let's take confined space entry, for instance. Confined space entry is inherently very, very high risk for a lot of different reasons. You can have a poor breathing atmosphere for the workers that are involved. Or you can have the risk of that breathing atmosphere dropping like a rock. And that's not going to be cool. Let's see if the other camera's working. Yeah, it's still working. And you can also have the risk of not being able to rescue imperiled workers successfully and quickly as you'd want. Or that just moving in and out and around the area is very difficult, and it may make care for workers that are working in that environment very difficult. So that emergency response process has to be there. Now, if you have confined space entry happening, and now all of a sudden, without the work permitting process, people have decided to work at heights. And most health and safety legislation in most jurisdictions states that if you have workers working in these different dangerous high-risk situations, you as the employer or the people that are in charge of the work or owning the work have to be responsible for the evacuation and rescue. So all of a sudden we have two. We have high working at heights processes in place, and we have hot work going on or confined space entry. And all of a sudden something happens simultaneously. What do we do with the emergency workers? What happens then? What do we do? And so that's a huge situation. Which emergency do we deal with first? So that's the idea. It's not just work scheduling, but it's the permitting so that all parts of the organization know what's going on and where. Now, the other case where work permitting and control of work also occurs is in not just in the construction and project phase, but it's also when you have, when you have a completed asset, a building. And it's a large, let's say you have a large complex. I've worked on very large complexes where you have renovations and you have repair and maintenance on an ongoing basis. And it's pretty difficult when you have exactly that same thing. Hot work, high angle work, you have confined space entry, and exactly what do you do as far as emergency management goes? And if you only have a certain amount of personnel, or if you're fully dependent on, say, external providers, say a local fire department, or you employ another rescue party, what happens then? And a lot of times, like I've worked in organizations where you had to rely on the municipal fire department for rescue. And So you usually most legislation, most jurisdictions will require a written letter keeping that along with conditions. And like one fire department I dealt with, they said that if it's inclement weather, we could not depend on any confined space rescue. So there you go. So it's a matter of persons put in the work permit, and before you okay the work permit, you're going to look at, okay, what's the weather going to be? And we all know the weather changes, but at least you have an idea. But then you have the opportunity to stop the work and control the work necessary. So the other case I've seen is with hot works. And in a building that's already built, established, the asset is completed, but all of a sudden, whether it's piping needs to be changed or whatever, there's some sort of welding and cutting that has to take place. And now a lot of jurisdictions will have what's called a spark watch or a hot watch or a fire watch, where the contractor or worker that's doing that work will have to watch the area and make sure that there's no possibilities of fire for a certain amount of time. It all depends on your jurisdiction. I can give you an example. It's spark watch has to occur every hour for up to 4 hours, and that's what the contractor has to do. But asset management or the building managers or the owners may decide that they want something more, but the contractor's not responsible for it. But they may ask their external security providers to provide that extended spark watch. So that's part of that work control and permitting process. So you may have a permit where your maintenance department issues the permit, they have a copy. Your safety personnel may have a copy. Your local fire department may have a copy, and the security organization that's providing, or the contractor that's providing security, may also have a copy, so all of them are aware of what's going on. So that's part and parcel of that work permitting process. Seifeldine, if you're still online, do you want to let me know if that makes sense to you as far as work permitting and control of work goes? And if not, I can come back to it. That's, by all means, that's not a problem. Now, the next thing, of course, and the next question that Seifeldine has brought up is, can I explain the difference between toolbox talk and toolbox meeting and training? And then plus, what is safety statistics and recordable, non-recordable incidents? Wow. Okay, we're going to treat that as a couple of questions, okay? So, first one is the toolbox talk and toolbox meeting and so forth. Toolbox talks are generally used for either a reinforcement for an already established process. But what you might do is you might want to include it. Say, for instance, you're going to be, excuse me, got to get a drink from the Provoking safety cup. Say you're going to be doing a lot of painting in an area as a contractor. So you're going to have a lot of people up on step ladders. So what you might do take the opportunity during your toolbox meeting, which is usually a pre-work meeting, to have a quick toolbox talk. So they're two different things. Toolbox meeting is something that should be done every day when you're going to be doing a project, doing work, and have a work crew. Usually led by the supervisor, but I've seen some very progressive, good companies assign that toolbox talk or toolbox meeting to different workers to get everybody involved. That's actually a best practice process, but you have to be wary because some people just don't like speaking in front of others. They can do good talking in a group, telling jokes, and as soon as you ask them to come up to the front and give a talk, they clam up. But that's another subject. If you want, I'll leave a link in a description about running a good toolbox talk. But anyway, toolbox talk would be part of that meeting where you might address stepladder safety. And just, you want to keep it short. You may say, okay, folks, just remember you're going to be working on step ladders today. So choose the appropriate ladder for the work. Okay, make sure that it's going to be high enough so you're close to the work, just below the work, and your center of gravity isn't going to move back and forth. The other thing is, oh, wow, Justin, I'll try to get to that one. I will. I promise. I'll try to get to that one. But anyway, as back to what I was saying, as far as ladder work goes, you'll want to talk to them about choosing the right ladder. Then the next step is you're going to say inspect it to make sure that all the components are in place, everything's together, there's continuity within the ladder and integrity, nothing is broken, it shouldn't be taken out of service. Extend it, push the spreaders down, and position it below your work so that you're just below your work and your center of gravity isn't going to deviate back and forth. Climb up, do your work, try to keep as many body parts in contact with the ladder as possible. Ideally, you're always supposed to have 3 points of contact on a ladder, and step ladders shouldn't be used for continuous work. If you have to be using both hands, you should be talking to your workers about setting up small scaffolding, whether it be a baker's scaffold or scaffolding for the job, depending on what you're doing. So that's how you might fit that toolbox talk. The other thing is make it appropriate. If you have a bunch of painters that you're working with, you're not going to talk to them about confined space entry unless they're working in a confined space to paint it. You're not going to talk to them about bullying and harassment unless, of course, it's occurred. You're going to make sure that your toolbox talk during your toolbox meeting is appropriate to the work going to take place. Because you know what, honestly, they're just going to, or this is the other one. Oh, I don't have my phone with me. They're going to be looking at their phones. They're not going to be paying attention to you. So this way you keep the attention on yourself. The other thing is, if you as the supervisor can start to work with the different people and getting them involved and giving that quick toolbox talk, remember, authorship leads to ownership, which leads to commitment. And when people are committed to those safety processes, then you know what? They're actually going to do them. So I just want to refresh myself. Did that help, Saifuldin, if you're still online with Toolbox Talk and Toolbox Meeting? Now, safety statistics and recordable and non-recordable incidents. Let me just talk about the last one. There should never be a non-recordable incident. If you have anything that disrupts work in any way, shape, or form, it should be considered an incident. Okay, whether it be what some people term as a near miss, actually a close call. A near miss means you actually got punched in the face. But considering, how should I put this? If anything interrupts, my camera froze again. And that one froze again. Well, let's get the camera working. Just hang on, bear with me. I don't know why my cameras are freezing, folks. I'm sorry, I just don't know. I think I'm overworking them, maybe. I don't know. There we go. I'm back. So when you're considering the, and where was I now? When you're considering incidents to report, everything that disrupts work should be reported. Now, it's the level of reporting that's necessary. I keep freezing. What's going on? I'm not sure. I apologize for this, folks. I don't know what's going on. It just keeps freezing. Okay, let's see if it'll stay working for a while. So you shouldn't have anything such as a non-reportable incident. It's just the level of reporting is going to be based on the magnitude. Same as the level of investigation is going to be based on the magnitude. Now, if someone cuts their finger and they go seek first aid, because realistically, there's very little jurisdictions that say that you shouldn't have first aid for every single injury. So they go see first aid, the first aid attendant would deal with it and then record the incident. So that incident is recorded and it would be part of the first aid statistics. It would be. And there's a lot of jurisdictions that require organizations to maintain statistics on the different first aid calls, whether they be ones that the worker needs to seek medical aid or they could be treated and maintained at work. No matter what, most organizations require the compilation of statistics for first aid calls. Now, you have a couple of different kinds of statistics. You have leading and lagging indicators. Now, all of your incident reports, whether they be on assets or injuries or whatever the case may be, all of your incident reports where work has been disrupted or interrupted because of a deviation in your workplace standards is basically an incident. So a box falling off a shelf and coming close to hitting a worker is an incident. No, but nothing happened. Nothing got hurt. Nothing got destroyed. The worker puts the box up on the shelf. But what caused that box to fall? Why did it fall? And can you prevent it from occurring again? The next thing you want to consider is other things like first aid reports and these things that have occurred. You've investigated them and they occurred in the past. Those are lagging indicators. So you can develop statistics that provide you with an opportunity for prevention, but helps you to understand what are your priority incidents, what are happening most of all, and dealing with them versus down to the least, because you should be trying to look after every single incident and prevent it. Now, your leading indicators. These are things like workplace inspections, and the records of inspections are good. So let's say, and let's see how they tie together. Let's say that you're doing inspections only 4 times a year, every quarter. Once every 3 months, you're doing an inspection. And realistically, as far as inspections go, you should be doing inspections based on the probable hazards in your workplace. So if you're, say, in mechanical work, manufacturing, heavier industry, inspections should be occurring fairly frequently, at least once a month. But, oh, thank you, Justin. Good to know. But as far as it goes, if you're in an administrative office and everything's the same and everything's low hazard, then you could get away with inspecting every quarter. But let's say that you're working in a heavy industry and you're inspecting every quarter, but then your incidents have a higher rate of occurring, and you notice that, and let's just take it this way. Let's say that you've had some overhead pulley and hoist failures that have been recorded over the last little while. Dang, I froze again. I'm going to have to get some new cam links, I think. They're just absolutely terrible. Give me a second, folks. I'm sorry about this. Okay, I don't know why I'm free. I don't know. That's honestly never happened before. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, so let's say that you have some overhead pulley and hoist failures, and they're happening, and you've noticed that they were happening every couple of months. So you have your leading indicators, your inspections are occurring, and they're showing every 3 months that you're going in and everything is just fine. But in between those inspections, you're having some hoist failures. So matching your leading and your lagging indicators together. One thing that you might want to consider is, okay, according to our lagging indicators, we're having a lot of hoist failures, but we're not catching them in the inspections. So what would be your obvious choice? Well, your obvious choice is to increase the amount of inspections, because your lagging indicators indicate you're having some more failures. And so then you might have the opportunity to catch them more. But also between the two of them, you might start to see things like logbooks are just being pencil whipped, or the inspections, the pre-use equipment inspections aren't taking place, things like that. So you have to use both your leading and lagging indicators together, especially when you're either investigating incidents or you're looking towards your risk management and using them in conjunction with your hazard assessments. And so your statistics should be used both in prevention, but also in that continuous improvement process. And the prevention might just not be, a lot of people will look at prevention as mechanical adjustments and fixing something and so forth, but it also might be adjusting your safe work procedures, adding new safe work practices, creating different guides, erecting different signage, etc. Some of those administrative controls need to be addressed as well, not just the engineering controls. So I hope that helps to answer that, Saifuldin, as far as statistics go. And let me have a quick look at the question again, just so that I can make sure I got it. Yeah. And so once again, every incident, anything that disrupts work should be recorded, whether it be a first aid call, someone's cut their finger and gone to get some treatment, maybe referred to medical aid, maybe not. That will be recorded, and it honestly should be recorded as an incident. But depending on your jurisdiction and your employer, I won't contradict anything. I'm just saying what would be a best practice. Now, Justin, just before I answer your question, I just want to answer one more regarding workers. And I've been asked a question a couple of times, and I said I want to address it on the channel. I'm not going to name the person or persons that have asked it. But if, and the question was basically worded this way. Organization that has full-time employees but relies a lot on volunteers for some of the work and some of the things they can get done. And there could be lots of different ones, whether it be, say, for instance, small SPCAs or clubs that employ some full-time people, but also have workers, whether they be baseball leagues, etc. So it's fully dependent. I'm going to let you consider the situation, but you have full-time and part-time workers that are regularly employed by the organization, plus volunteers helping that organization to reach their goal. So these volunteers, and here's an idea that might help you identify it. These volunteers are performing duties and tasks that will benefit the employer or the organization. So realistically, whether they're paid or not, they're working for the benefit of the employer. So they should be considered workers dependent on your jurisdiction. Like where I live in Alberta, the legislation actually indicates students on practicums and unpaid workers, volunteers, etc. Not all of them do that, so it's important that you delve into your legislation and have a look. But it may require you, if you have a threshold for not requiring a formal health and safety program, say that there's only 5 or 6 employed workers and there's 20 volunteers that will show up at scheduled times to perform the tasks. So now actually what you have is a complement of 25 workers, 5 that are paid and 20 that are unpaid. And if you have a threshold like we do in Alberta, where if you have 20 workers working for your organization, then you're required to have a formal health and safety program. And so realistically, that's where you have to look. Now in Alberta, it doesn't mean you have to have a formal joint health and safety committee, but you do have to have a formal health and safety program. So once again, if you're a volunteer organization with regular employees, but you employ a lot of volunteers to achieve your ends, you might actually be having to look at them as workers depending on the situation. So you might want to examine that. Now, Justin, you asked an excellent question, is vertical versus horizontal standards. And that's awesome because actually you have like an X and Y axis. And honestly, that's the truth. The idea is here in Alberta, for instance, we don't have what is minimum requirements for a health and safety program. What it says is your program has to work with the idea of continuous improvement. So a blend of that's opposite. Sorry, the camera's moving opposite. But a blend of both X and Y, so it's moving up. I'm sorry, anyway, it's moving up. There we go. We'll do it this way. It's moving up on a constant arc. I'll get that yet. Sorry about that. But anyway, so your vertical standards are what's going to be moving and what needs to be increased depending on the external and internal influences. Whether they be as work increases or activities increase, these standards have to go up. Whereas you'll have some that can remain a constant. And I'm just trying to think of an example. It's an incredibly excellent question. And believe it or not, I'm going to be doing an upcoming video based on your program standards and root cause. Because realistically, if you're looking at, and here's the teaser for it, if you're looking at root cause as something external, to your organization's program and standards, then you're looking at the wrong root cause. Like, for instance, everybody blames COVID. It's COVID that caused the problem. No, it's your standards weren't adequate to cope with it. That's the absolute truth. And so your vertical standards, think, for instance, as a project is progressing and getting completed, that your standards and what you're doing will have to increase as completion moves on. Some of those standards may decrease depending on what is going on. So you'll have that constantly moving standard, but you'll have this always constant level one. Say, for instance, if it's a security organization, you may have many security personnel patrolling an area as the project is going on. But as the project is completed, then that amount of security personnel is going to start to reduce depending on the level of completion, because you'll have things like alarm systems and barricades and everything coming online. So that once was a higher standard will start to decrease. But say, for instance, you have external influences, you have an increase in theft, and you have increase in vandalism or whatever, you may have to ramp up the security coverage depending on what's going on. But one of the things you're always going to note is you're always going to have security coverage. And some of that may also have to do with lighting. You'll have a certain amount of lighting that's always going to be required in certain areas. Say, for instance, hallways are always going to have a certain level of lux coverage. And so that is one lighting and maintain standard. Whereas depending on the work that's being done in different places, depending on what is being done in different places, you may have different standards in lighting that'll move up. And Saifuldin, I'll get to you in just a sec with that question. That's very good. Yes, Justin, that is brilliant. I just wish I could have been as eloquent. Thank you. Yeah, you're and some standards, like I said, hallway lighting is never ever going to change. But work and task lighting is going to change based on what you're doing. So you'll always have that baseline lighting requirement throughout a building, but the vertical adjustment may change. Just like you have working alone, but and you may have a working alone program and nobody's working alone. But all of a sudden, and COVID was one of those things that started to bring about working alone, because organizations started to have on-site skeleton crews, but most people were working remotely from home. And so now all of a sudden the working alone process goes up versus that continuous standard that's there. And so if you're to think of root cause, oh, sorry to hear that you have the flu, Jim. Sorry about that. Get well soon, buddy. But now where was I? I got lost by the flu. Oh, sorry about that. But getting back to the horizontal and vertical standards, where you'll always have, in a lot of cases, you'll have a standard and it will be just flatline. But depending on external or internal influences, you may move that standard up and down. So when you have an issue, and I'll do another video on this, you want to delve into root cause. And your root cause should be, is it absent root cause standards? Is it absent program standards? So you have no standards to cover that incident. So there's your root cause. You had no program standards, or you had inadequate standards. Say, for instance, you had a small statement about working alone in your health and safety program, but nothing addressing working alone. All of a sudden COVID hit and you have employees working alone all over the place. Somebody gets hurt. Part of that root cause, or one of the contributing factors, might have been no working alone process. So either you have absent standards, inadequate standards, or you have non-compliance with those standards. And sometimes it might have been an HR standard. It might have been a health and safety program standard. You have to remember, your health and safety management system is the integration of all your organizational systems with your health and safety program. So it's how HR meshes with health and safety. It's how operations mesh with health and safety. It's how your external management processes, and I'm talking about contractors, etc., mesh with health and safety. All of that becomes a health and safety management system. So your health and safety management system has to have those standards. If you're blaming something external as a root cause, then you're not looking at the right root cause, because you should be always looking at something and determining something that you can change and influence. You can change your program, you can adapt your program, you can put controls in place. Understanding, hey, yeah, the whole world couldn't deal with COVID, but can you put controls in place where COVID is not as much of an influence on your program? Hey, thanks for the compliment, Justin. So now, getting back, Saifuldin asked once again, what are safety statistics? And so once again, these are the records that you're keeping of anything that causes a deviation in your program, whether they be incidents, whether they be close calls, injuries, asset damage, combination of all of those. But they're also workplace inspection records. They're also new hire orientation records. All of these are your records, and they provide you with those statistics. Your statistics should be split into two different kinds. You have leading indicators, things that you're doing, activities that you're performing, looking at prevention and enforcing your program and promoting your program. So workplace inspections are a very good example of where you'd get leading indicators. Health and safety orientations for new hires and contractors is where you'd have good leading indicators, because you're determining how many times you're looking for those hazards or those possibilities of something occurring. Lagging indicators are what's already occurred. Okay, and inspections are also an indicator of lagging indicators. They're where you may have had deficiencies when you've been, and we'll go back to those pulleys and overhead hoists. You went and looked, and an overhead hoist was not secured properly, or you looked at the logbook and nothing was recorded for the last 3 months. So those are deficiencies. They're also lagging indicators, but then your incident investigations and your conclusions are also lagging indicators. Your first aid reports are also lagging indicators. This is how often something has happened, and it helps you to go back and look at the prevention methods that you have and tweak them and make them better. Does that help you, Saifuldin? Does that help answer that question? Well, I'm hoping so anyway. Yeah, and now, like anything else, you might not think of anything or nothing else has come up as a question. So by all means, do me a favor, leave me something in one of the comments. I'll try to post a follow-up thing in my community tab. So if you want to look at the community tab on the website or on the YouTube channel, by all means. And whatever it is, however you want to fire me a question, whether it be clicking on the channel and doing it through my email or just posting it as a comment. I try to answer all of the comments all of the time. And once again, thank you very much for all of you that have joined and participated in the chat. Yeah, do that. Like, subscribe. I imagine all of you have already subscribed because the ones that are in the chat are subscribers. So once again, I don't know if there's anything else left to say. Everybody seems to have, whoops. There we go. Everybody seems to have petered down. I do apologize for some of the technical difficulties. I don't know what's happened. It's never happened before. And so I'll take a look at it before the next time. I'm hoping to stream again in another couple of weeks, but it's also going to be dependent on the questions and what's come up and if there's something pressing for a discussion as the preamble into the stream. So I just want to wish you all a very good day or evening, depending on where you are. Take care and do me a favor. Always be that leader, be that influencer, provoke safety wherever you are. Okay? Yeah. crank up the music, and once again, thanks, Justin, for your input. I really appreciate it. It was a very good chat, and thanks for your involvement. Okay, so take care, everybody. Bye for now.